Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. So today we're going to be taking a look at Guyana.
Okay.
Specifically Guyanese politics. We got an article here from News Source Guyana, and it looks like there's some concerns about their upcoming election in 2025.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is this is like the main opposition group in Guyana, APNU, and AFC.
Okay.
They're really worried about whether this election is going to be, free and fair.
Right, because if the people don't trust the results,
exactly,
that's never good.
No, it's not. And the leader of the AFC, Nigel Hughes, he's actually saying that Guyana could be looking at a perpetual crisis.
Oh, wow.
If these concerns aren't addressed.
Yeah, that doesn't sound good. A perpetual crisis.
No.
So what is it about this election? I mean, besides just a normal election, what's going on in Guyana?
Well, one of the interesting things is that Guyana is about to become a major oil producer.
Oh, wow. So big money coming in.
Exactly. Big money. And sometimes not always the best actors are attracted to that.
Yeah. So high stakes.
Very high stakes.
Yeah.
So this election is more than just, electing a leader.
Right.
It's about who controls the future of this oil wealth.
Okay. So we've got potential instability.
Yeah.
We've got this economic boom coming. And an election that could really change the course of the country. So what are some of the specific issues that the opposition's bringing up?
So at the top of the list is the voters list. They are saying that the current list is just not credible.
Right.
And they want a brand new one.
See, and this is what I find interesting. The article mentions that even the current ruling party, the PPPC, they actually used to demand a new voters list when they were the opposition.
It's amazing how things change.
Isn't it?
Once you're in power. So yeah, everyone seems to agree that the voters list needs work.
But no one wants to do it when it's their problem.
Apparently not. And it's not a new concern either. The 2020 election was also highly contested. And international observers, even from like the US, the UK, Canada, the EU, lots of Caribbean nations, they all recommended a new voters list in their reports after that election.
So this isn't just something the opposition's making up.
No, not at all.
This has been a long-standing...
Yeah, it's a recurring theme.
So besides a new list, what else are they asking for? What's their plan to try and make this election more trustworthy?
They really want new technology at the polling places.
Oh, okay.
Like electronic voting and biometrics.
Okay, now when they say biometrics, what exactly do they mean?
So think like fingerprint scanning, like how you unlock your phone.
Okay.
But in this case, you're securing your vote. It verifies your identity, makes sure there's no duplicate voting.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
If you can only vote once, that makes the results a little more accurate.
Exactly. And the AFC argues that, no system is perfect, but this technology can really help.
So it sounds like they're really trying to be proactive and head off any potential problems before they even start.
Yes, they are definitely challenging the PPPC to support these reforms.
So they're basically saying, if you think you can win fairly, then prove it.
Exactly.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah.
So how has the PPPC responded to this?
Well, that's what we'll get into next. It gets pretty interesting because there are some warnings about what might happen if they don't take these concerns seriously.
Oh, okay. So stay tuned because things are about to get a little spicy.
Sure.
Okay, so they're really pushing for these reforms, but what's the AFC's plan to make them happen? Like, how are they actually going to get this done?
Well, they're putting a lot of pressure on the PPPC. They're saying, if you guys really believe in a fair election, then you should support these changes. And they've even said they'll back funding for these reforms in the National Assembly.
So it's like a put your money where your mouth is kind of thing.
Exactly. And the stakes are pretty high here. Nigel Hughes, the AFC leader, he's issued some serious warnings.
Well, like what?
Like, ignoring this could lead to some real problems after the election in 2025.
Yeah. That's no joke. And it's not just Hughes. Beverly Alert, she's an executive member of the AFC and a member of parliament.
Right.
She basically calls out the ruling party and reminds them that their own vice president, Parag Jagdeo, he was a big advocate for these same reforms when he was in the opposition.
It's like calling them out for hypocrisy.
A little bit, yeah. Like, remember when you guys were demanding this?
Exactly.
Now it's your turn.
Right.
So there's a lot of tension around these reforms.
Sure.
But let's zoom out for a second. You mentioned earlier that Guyana is on the verge of this huge oil boom. How does that play into all of this?
It adds a whole other layer of complexity. Guyana's a relatively young democracy.
Right.
And they've got these deep political divisions. And then suddenly, boom, all this wealth comes in.
And everyone wants a piece.
Yeah. The stakes get so much higher.
Right.
It's not just about picking a leader anymore. It's about who gets to control this new oil money.
So the potential for corruption skyrockets.
Exactly.
That's a little scary.
Yeah, and that's why a credible election is so important. It's about making sure that the transfer of power is peaceful no matter who wins.
Right.
It's about preventing the kind of instability and unrest that often happens,
When you get a sudden influx of wealth.
Right.
Yeah, and that's where that voters list becomes so crucial.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the article makes it clear that without a trustworthy list, the whole election is in jeopardy.
Yeah, it's like the foundation. Think about it. A bad voters list could stop legitimate voters from voting. It could open the door for fraud.
Right.
And then nobody trusts the system, and it just creates a huge crisis.
So what are some potential consequences if they don't fix this? I mean, what happens if this election does go off the rails?
Well, I mean, the most immediate concern is civil unrest.
Oh, okay.
If people think the election was rigged, they might protest, and that could lead to violence.
That makes sense.
Yeah, which makes it really hard for the government to function.
And that scares off investors, right? Especially those in the oil industry.
Oh, absolutely. Businesses need stability and predictability.
Right.
If Guyana gets a reputation for electoral violence and uncertainty,
Nobody wants to invest.
no, they'll go somewhere else.
And the oil shelf they're hoping to capitalize on could actually backfire.
It's a real possibility.
Yeah, that's a scary thought.
It is.
But, I'm sure some of our listeners are thinking, okay, this is all very interesting, but I don't live in Guyana, so why should I care?
Right. That's a fair question.
Why does this matter to us?
Well, I think it matters because we live in a really interconnected world.
Mm-hmm.
Political instability in one country can actually affect everyone.
Okay.
And in this case, Guyana's oil production could affect global energy markets.
So if their production gets disrupted, it could mess with gas prices all over the world.
Exactly. And, on top of that, Guyana is a democracy.
Like a lot of our listeners.
Right. And what happens to democracy anywhere affects us all.
I see your point.
It's about those values, making sure people have a say in their government no matter where they live.
So it's not just about Guyana.
Right.
It's about the bigger picture.
It is.
Okay, so let's get back to those proposed solutions. You mentioned electronic voting and biometrics. How realistic are these options?
Well, electronic voting can really streamline the process and reduce human error. But it needs reliable technology and infrastructure.
Yeah.
And that can be expensive, especially in a country like Guyana.
And what about biometrics? Are there any concerns about privacy or misuse?
Oh, for sure. Anytime you're dealing with personal data like fingerprints, you have to be careful.
Right.
The system has to be really secure to prevent unauthorized access or breaches.
So these solutions, they come with their own challenges.
They do, but the AFC argues that doing nothing is way worse.
They'd rather spend the money and try to fix it.
Yeah, they see it as an investment in their democracy.
And speaking of investment, you mentioned international observers earlier.
Yeah.
Could they play a role in making sure this election is fair?
Absolutely. They can provide oversight.
Okay.
And help guarantee that things are done fairly and transparently. And they can even offer technical assistance and support.
So international pressure could be a good thing.
It can be if it's done right.
Right. Not too much interference.
Exactly. But having that watchful eye from the international community can really help.
So Guyana's kind of at a crossroads.
Yeah, definitely.
But this election could really make or break their future.
Absolutely. The choices they make in the next few months are crucial.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick... All right, so we've been talking about this election in Guyana and all the concerns about whether it's going to be fair.
Right.
And I think it raises some really interesting questions about, how do you guarantee fair elections, especially when you've got all this oil money coming in?
Yeah, and a history of political tension.
Exactly. So it's not just about, getting the voters list right or having the right technology. Mm-hmm. We're talking about these really deep-seated societal issues that make it hard for people to trust the system.
It's like this election is a microcosm of all these bigger problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really is. And it makes you think about the average person in Guyana,
Right.
What are they hoping for? What are they afraid of? I mean, we're talking about potential unrest, maybe even violence.
Yeah, it's not just about abstract political ideas for them.
Right.
This is about their lives, their safety, their future.
Exactly. And this article from News Source Guyana, it focuses on the details of the election.
Yeah.
But you can sense that underlying tension.
Definitely. It's like the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we try to do here on the deep dive, right? We try to go beyond the headlines.
Right. Explore those deeper currents.
And in this case, those currents are shaping Guyana's future.
Absolutely.
This oil wealth could really transform the country.
It could.
But it could also make things worse if the election isn't seen as legitimate.
It's a double-edged sword.
It really is. It makes you realize that democracy is something you have to constantly work at.
Definitely.
It's not a one-and-done kind of deal.
No, it takes constant vigilance, you know?
Right, you have to adapt to new challenges.
Exactly. Every election is a test.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it's a test of how committed a country is to democracy and a chance to strengthen those institutions that protect a fair process.
And in a place like Guyana, where those institutions are still pretty new, the stakes are even higher.
I agree.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left wondering, what can we do about this? You know, we're sitting here thousands of miles away.
Right.
Does it even matter what happens in Guyana?
I think it does.
Okay, why?
I think there are a few key takeaways here. First, democracy is fragile.
Okay.
It needs to be protected.
And not just in our own countries.
Exactly. It's something we can't take for granted anywhere.
What else?
Well, it also highlights how interconnected we all are. What happens in one part of the world can affect everyone.
Yeah, like we were talking about with the oil.
Exactly. Economic instability, political unrest, those things can have a ripple effect.
We can't just ignore what's happening in other countries.
Right. And finally, I think it shows the power of being an informed citizen.
Okay, I like that.
You know, by understanding the challenges that democracies face around the world, we can be better citizens in our own communities.
So we can start asking questions about our own elections, holding our own leaders accountable.
Exactly, making sure our voices are heard.
So maybe this deep dive into Guyanese politics is also a deep dive into our own roles as citizens.
It's a lot to think about.
It really is.
But that's what these deep dives are all about, right?
Yeah.
They challenge us to think critically, see things from different perspectives, and really engage with the world.
Well said. Yeah. Well, on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those big questions. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dives. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring.